Welcome to part 6 of human reproduction. In this part, we will discuss the menstrual cycle and also the hormonal influence on menstrual cycle. Ready? So here we go. We have the first slide explaining about the menstrual cycle and reproductive cycles. The reproductive cycle in female primates is known as menstrual cycle. In the case of non-primates or animals other than primata, they have estrous cycle. In the case of man, monkey, apes, they are all belonging to order primata. So we are all coming under primata group. So in the case of monkeys, apes, human beings, or in order primata, the reproductive cycle is known as menstrual cycle. So I repeat, the menstrual cycle is the reproductive cycle found in female primates. And what do you mean by this menstrual cycle? Menstrual cycle, it is the sequence of events beginning from one menstruation to the next. So all the sequence of events beginning from one menstruation to the beginning of next, that is called menstrual cycle, and it will happen in a cyclic manner. In the case of human females, the menstruation is repeated at an average interval of 28 days. So the menstrual cycle will have an average of 28 days. Okay, you can see the representation here. So these are the days of average menstrual cycle. In the case of human beings, according to the physiological condition, the number of days will vary. Number of days will be different from individual to individual, and also within an individual, according to the physiological condition, the number of days can vary. But the days of an average menstrual cycle will be 28 days. Okay. Now, there is a term given for the first menstruation. Menstruation will begin when individual attains puberty. So, the first menstrual flow is known as menarche. The first menstruation will begin at puberty. When a female attains puberty, the first menstruation will begin, and that is called menarche. And you also know that in the case of human beings, menstrual cycle will stop at the age of around 50 years. So the stoppage of the menstrual cycle or cessation of the menstrual cycle is called menopause. So reproductive years of a female is actually in between menarche to menopause. From menarche to menopause, that is called reproductive years of a female. So first menstruation is called menarche, and stoppage of the menstruation or menstrual cycle is known as menopause. Now we are going to study in detail the different events or steps in menstrual cycle, or there are different phases in menstrual cycle. In this diagram it is very clear. Okay, so from day 1 to day 5 you can see a menstrual flow. So that is called the menstruation phase or menstrual phase. So day 1 to day 5 is called the menstrual phase. From day 6 to day 14 we can consider it as the follicular phase. It is called the follicular phase or proliferative phase. So day 6 to 14 is called proliferative phase. And on the 14th day, there will be ovulation. Ovulation is expected to occur on the 14th day if it is a 28-day cycle. So on the 14th day here, you can see an ovulation, or you can consider it as an ovulatory phase. And after that, you can consider a secretory phase. After that, you can consider a secretory phase or luteal phase. So there are two terms, luteal phase and secretory phase, starting from 15th to 28th. So why we are giving two terms here? It is because the events of the menstrual cycle will happen, or the changes are happening in the ovary as well as in uterus. So when you are considering changes in ovary, the term given will be follicular phase, because in ovary the follicles are undergoing changes. Follicles are undergoing development. That is why we call it as a follicular phase. But with respect to uterus, the same period, the same phase can be called the proliferative phase, because the endometrium is thickening. So we can call it as the proliferative phase. Like that, because of the changes happening in the ovary, we call it as the luteal phase here. Okay. And considering changes in the uterus, we call it as secretory phase also. So follicular phase and proliferative phase both are same. Okay. Both are same, and like that luteal phase and secretory phase, these two terms are also having the same sort of meaning. The term is given according to the events happening in ovary as well as events happening in uterus. Taking into that consideration, we are giving or we are using two terms here. Okay, so what are the phases in menstrual cycle? I repeat, the phases in menstrual cycle are menstrual phase from 1st to 5th day, then follicular phase or proliferative phase from 6th to 14th day, and ovulatory phase on the 14th day, luteal phase or secretory phase from 15th to 28th day. Now we will study in detail each phase. First of all, we consider the menstrual phase. What are the characters of the menstrual phase? In the case of menstrual phase, points are it is from day 1 to day 5, or usually it will have a duration of 3 or 5 days. Then menstrual flow results due to breakdown of the endometrium. The endometrial wall will break, and there will be breaking of the blood vessels and the liquid that comes out from the vaginal region, and that is considered as the menstrual flow. So menstrual flow occurs in menstrual phase. So here in this picture you can see the menstrual flow shown here. Okay, this is the endometrial lining. So as a uterine event, you can see the menstrual flow from day 1 to day 5. Okay, so menstrual flow is considered as the menstrual phase from day 1 to day 5. And lack of menstruation, if there is a lack of menstruation or absence of menstruation, we can consider is as an indication of pregnancy. So if there is no menstrual flow in one cycle, if there is a stopping of menstrual cycle, or if there is stopping of menstruation, we can expect a pregnancy, or that is an indicative of pregnancy. We move to the next phase. Next phase is our proliferative phase. What do you mean by proliferative phase or follicular phase? It is from day 6 to 14. From 6th to 14th day of the cycle, we consider the proliferative phase. So here, why it is called the proliferative phase? Because of the proliferation of the endometrium. So here in this picture, you can see in this proliferative phase, the endometrium is undergoing proliferation. It is undergoing a thickening in order to prepare for an implantation of embryo. This endometrium is undergoing a thickening. You can see the level is increasing. The number of cells are increasing. So proliferation is happening to the endometrium during the proliferative phase. So within the uterus, you can see the proliferation. From day 6 to 14, you can see the proliferation of the endometrium. At the same time, in ovary, what happens? Within ovary, you can see the development of the follicles. Follicles will develop from primary to secondary, from secondary to tertiary. So like that, follicles are undergoing development in the ovary. So that is why this phase is also called the follicular phase. So the same period, the same time period can be called proliferative phase as well as follicular phase with respect to the changes or with respect to the location we consider. So here ovarian follicles will begin to develop and it will mature to Graafian follicle and it will secrete estrogen. You know, estrogen is a hormone produced by the ovary. Which part of ovary will produce estrogen? It is by the follicles, the developing ovarian follicles. So when follicles develop, by the influence of the FSH, follicles will secrete a hormone called estrogen. Okay, and that estrogen is acting on the endometrium. So estrogen is actually acting on the endometrium, and it is responsible for the proliferation. So endometrium begins to thicken by the action of the estrogen. So I repeat, when you consider the hormonal influence, pituitary is actually secreting FSH, and by the effect of FSH, follicles are undergoing development. So developing follicles are secreting estrogen, and that estrogen is going to influence the endometrium, and endometrial wall will thicken. Endometrium is undergoing proliferation. You got it? So here it is written very clearly that LH and FSH from pituitary that increases gradually. During this phase, the LH and FSH level in blood will increase gradually. So from day 6 to 14, the LH and FSH level will increase gradually. Okay. And that increase in the level of LH and FSH further will stimulate the Graafian follicles to stimulate estrogen also. So estrogen level will also increase. So during proliferative phase, LH, FSH they increase, and as a result, the estrogen level will also increase because estrogen in turn is produced by the developing follicles. You got it? So now we move on to the next phase of the menstrual cycle. Which is the next phase of menstrual cycle? That is the ovulatory phase. Okay. So we have explained the menstruation or menstrual phase. Then the proliferate is over here. Now here there is ovulation. On the 14th day, you can see the rupturing of the follicle. On the 14th day, the Graafian follicle will rupture and it will release the secondary oocyte. So in the last session, I have told you about the release of the secondary oocyte from the Graafian follicle. So this process is called ovulation. This will happen in the ovary. Okay. So here, ovulatory phase, it will happen on the 14th day of the cycle. If you consider a 28-day cycle, on the 14th day there will be ovulation. And it is because of the LH surge. What do you mean by LH surge? LH surge is the peak level of luteinizing hormone. The luteinizing hormone in blood will reach a peak level, and that peak level is considered as the LH surge, and LH surge will induce the rupturing of the follicle and release of the ovum. So ovulation will happen because of the LH surge. Okay, so graphical representation I will give you later. So here we are going through the different phases only now. Okay, so ovulatory phase I have explained. There is ovulation on the 14th day. Now, another phase is secretory phase. What do you mean by secretory phase or luteal phase? Here, in the secretory phase or luteal phase, you can see some changes happening in the ovary as well as in the uterus. When you are observing the uterus or endometrial lining, you can see now the endometrium is highly secretory. Endometrium is highly secretory now. And what about the ovary? Within ovary, you can see the developing corpus luteum. You know, after ovulation, the Graafian follicle ruptured and now it is transformed into a corpus luteum. Okay. Now corpus luteum will develop and it will begin to produce progesterone. So that is what is happening in the case of a luteal phase. So from 15th to 28th day, okay, from 15th to 28th day, from 15 to 28, you can see the development of the corpus luteum within ovary, and it will begin to produce progesterone, and that progesterone will act on endometrium, and endometrium will become glandular. Endometrial wall will become glandular or it will become secretory. Now it is very much ready for receiving a fertilized or embryo. It is now very much ready to receive an embryo now. So that preparation is going on here on the endometrium. Okay. So here on the explanation part you can see it here. Luteal phase with respect to ovary we call it as the luteal phase. And with respect to the endometrial wall or uterus, we call it as a secretory phase. So it is from 15 to 28. And the remaining part of the Graafian follicle will transform into corpus luteum. I have explained it now. Then corpus luteum will begin to secrete what? It will begin to secrete progesterone. What is the role of progesterone? Progesterone, it is essential for the maintenance of the endometrium, maintenance of pregnancy. The health of the uterine wall is maintained by progesterone. Okay, so now the cycle is over. Now, if there is no fertilization, what will happen? If there is no fertilization, again there will be a menstrual flow. Now here on the slide you have the hormonal influence. Now I am going to speak about hormonal influence on the menstrual cycle. Are you all ready? So I have explained the different phases of menstrual cycle. Now I am with a set of hormones, the same hormones that I have explained, which influence the menstrual cycle. Are you all ready? So here we go. So here you can see when a female attains puberty, from hypothalamus there will be release of gonadotropin releasing hormone. GnRH will be released at a high level when the individual attains puberty. From which portion? From hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is having an endocrine role. Okay. So as a releasing hormone, GnRH will be released from hypothalamus. It will act on pituitary. And then pituitary will produce FSH and LH. What is happening when pituitary is activated? Pituitary will begin to produce FSH and LH. These FSH and LH, they are called gonadotropins. You may note down FSH and LH, they are called gonadotropins because they act on gonads. So here in this female, the gonad is ovary. So FSH and LH, which is released from pituitary, will act on ovary now. And then ovary will produce two sets of hormones. Okay, that we have discussed while we were discussing, while I was explaining menstrual cycle. I have given you an idea about release of estrogen and progesterone. Okay, so from ovary, what will be released? Estrogen and progesterone. You know, estrogen is produced from the ovarian follicles or from developing follicles, and progesterone from the corpus luteum. So, due to the influence of FSH and LH or gonadotropins on ovary, ovary will produce estrogen and progesterone, and these two hormones, they have their effect on the uterus. So these two hormones, they will act on uterine wall and they will make some changes on the endometrial lining here. So this is the way in which hormones are influencing the menstrual cycle. Before going to the next slide, let me tell you one thing. Here, there is a positive feedback as well as a negative feedback. The level of hormones like estrogen and progesterone will have a positive effect as well as an inhibitory effect according to the stages of the menstrual cycle. Okay, so this is about the hormonal influence of menstrual cycle. So what are the different hormones here? The pituitary hormones are FSH and LH, and the ovarian hormones are estrogen and progesterone. So these are the set of hormones controlling or regulating the menstrual cycle in females. So I was explaining you about the hormonal influence on menstrual cycle. To know further, we have a diagram from your NCERT. So this diagram clearly explains the level of these hormones in your blood. So here we have a set of pituitary hormones shown here. What are the two types of pituitary hormones? One is FSH and other is LH. So this red color belongs to that of FSH level, and the blue color denotes the LH level. So you know, here ovarian hormones also we have to discuss. Okay, ovarian hormones are estrogen and progesterone. So estrogen is in blue color, blue line here, and progesterone is in the Yes, it is in the red line marked here. Okay. So first of all, you have to identify two sets of hormones coming from pituitary and two sets of hormones coming from ovary. Okay. So you can see some changes happening for these hormones throughout the menstrual cycle. You can see the FSH level and LH level will change according to the phase of the menstrual cycle. Like that, the estrogen progesterone level or ovarian hormone level will also change according to the time of the menstrual cycle. According to the phase of the menstrual cycle, estrogen progesterone level also changes. To know more about this, we are going to separate these two. We will study first of all the pituitary hormones. I am going to explain you more about the pituitary hormones and their roles and about their levels. Are you all ready? So first of all, the role of pituitary hormones in menstrual cycle. I repeat, FSH and LH. So what is the role of FSH in menstrual cycle? FSH, it causes development of the ovarian follicles. And what is the role of LH? LH, it causes the LH surge. LH will cause the LH surge. You know what is LH surge? LH surge, it happens on the 14th day, that induces the rupturing of the Graafian follicle and release of the ovum. So usually they will ask this question. This is the frequently asked question. The role of pituitary hormones in menstrual cycle. They will ask you to name the two hormones and also to mention the role of these two hormones. So here we have the name of the hormones and also the role of the hormones. And you can see the levels here. This diagram is very important. Okay, the correct labeling they will ask. You have to label the hormones in a correct manner. The LH level should be very high because LH surge is responsible for ovulation. FSH is below. So LH is at the top and FSH is below that. You right? Now we have the next slide which shows the role of ovarian hormones. Role of ovarian hormones in menstrual cycle. Here it is about the two hormones estrogen and progesterone we are speaking. Estrogen, it is responsible for proliferation of the endometrium. Estrogen level, it increases during proliferative phase. So that is very important. Which hormone is very high during proliferative phase? It is estrogen. So this point is very important. So by the influence of FSH on the ovarian follicles will develop, and ovarian follicles are developing in the follicular phase, and by the influence of the ovarian follicles are secreting estrogen. So that is why estrogen level is very high, or its level will increase during proliferative phase. So that point is very important. Proliferation of the endometrium is due to the estrogen level. Estrogen is causing proliferation. So they will ask which hormone is high during proliferative phase. Which hormone, which ovarian hormone is high during proliferative phase? Our answer will be estrogen. Like that, which hormone is high in the secretory phase? In the secretory phase, the progesterone level will be high. And why? Because of the corpus luteum. Corpus luteum will begin to produce progesterone in the secretory phase or in the luteal phase. Okay, so corpus luteum, when it produces the progesterone level will be high in the secretory phase. Okay, so which hormone is high in proliferative phase? Estrogen. Which hormone is high in secretory phase? It is our progesterone. So now here we have the role of estrogen. It is responsible for proliferation of the endometrium. And what is the role of progesterone? It maintains the endometrium, and it is necessary for implantation and also for continuation of pregnancy. For other events of pregnancy also, this hormone is very much necessary. Progesterone is necessary. That is why progesterone is said to be a pregnancy hormone. So in this class, I was explaining you about menstrual cycle, the different phases of the menstrual cycle, and also the hormonal influence of the menstrual cycle. I hope you all understood all these topics about the functions of the hormones and also the level of hormones. All these are very important. Diagrams are very important. Role of hormones very important. Okay, I will come with another topic. So the next topic for discussion will be fertilization and implantation. See you then. It's goodbye from Stephen Classes.